Last week, we began a new series titled One Another. There's some great theology in the New Testament, but if you look at it closely, you'll find that a big portion of the New Testament deals with how we relate to other people. And sometimes we skip over those things because we're wanting deep stuff. We want deep teachings. And really, when you get down to it, Jesus didn't teach a whole lot of deep stuff. Jesus taught love people, take care of people, all that kind of stuff. And even the apostles in their writings, a lot of it deals with simply how we relate to other people. There are instructions, commands. We're going to learn they're not just instructions, they're not just guidelines, commands actually, that tell us how we should relate to those both outside and inside the church. Some of the things we're going to talk about in this series apply to our relationships with both groups. There are some things that we're supposed to do with both, but there are some that simply deal with our relationships one another, and that's primarily what we're going to be dealing with through this series. How are we to treat one another? And if we can learn to treat one another correctly, that should spill out into how we treat those outside the church. So last week we kicked off the series by looking at 1 John chapter 1, verses 3 through 7, where John talks about fellowship. We learned what fellowship is. He talked about two kinds of fellowship with God and fellowship with one another. And we learned the difference last week between friendship and fellowship, because a lot of what we call fellowship in the church is not truly fellowship. It's friendship. Fellowship goes deeper than the surface relationships. Fellowship is iron sharpening iron, getting deep, not just taking the simple answers or asking the simple questions, not expecting a deep answer. We're really good at saying, how you doing? And we're hoping to say, oh, I'm doing great. We really don't want them to tell us how they're really doing, because if they tell us how they're really doing, then we will feel obligated to do something about it. And we all know that when somebody asks us how we're doing, they want a great. So even if we're feeling lousy, we say, okay, or good, or something like that. That's what they want to hear. Fellowship goes deeper, and fellowship sometimes says, no, I want to know how you're really doing. I really want to know how I can help you. Now, that's fellowship, and fellowship is with us here. We have a lot of friendships out there in the world. Fellowship is supposed to deal with us, but sometimes we need to go that next step even with the world. It's not called fellowship then, because the Bible tells us not to have fellowship with the world. We can still have friendships because we're supposed to reach out to them, but sometimes we need to ask the deeper questions too. Because, as I already said, one of the things we did with our food giveaway is we added a next step. Instead of just giving them food and saying, no, look at that, look what we did. Great job. We gave them food. We said, how else can we help you? We want to know, what else can we do? And that's what warms people up to hearing the gospel message. Jesus started by meeting the tangible needs, but he always went deeper. So we learned last week that friendship is based on common likes and dislikes. What are we interested in? What are our hobbies? That's what friendship is based on. Fellowship is based on common identity and common purpose. We choose our friends based on common interests. We choose friends that have the same hobbies or interests we do. And the reason they're our friends is because we enjoy doing things together. How many of you guys have friends that you don't like to be around? We pick our friends. I got a couple hands, okay? But normally we pick our friends because we like to be with them. We like to do things with them. Fellowship is saying, you know what? We may not have the same interests. We may not have the same hobbies, but we are all connected through our purpose and through our identity. Our identity and our purpose all comes from Jesus Christ. So even if it's somebody who thinks different than I do, I mean, they need to agree on the important things about Jesus and God and that kind of stuff. But even if it's not somebody that I would go out and just spend time with, just doing other things, we are going to connect and we are going to learn to get along because we have a common identity and because we share a common purpose. So we will work together and spend time together. We talked last week about Jesus' disciples. He had a group of 12 men that would not have chosen to be friends for the most part. I mean, a couple of fishermen were already friends or brothers before they came to Jesus, but that group of people normally would not have spent time together. They were on totally opposite ends of the spectrum, but Jesus brought them together for a common purpose and taught them how to fellowship together. And through the fellowship, they developed friendships. There's nothing wrong with having great friendships. In fact, we should have great friendships. But just enjoying great friendships is not going to accomplish something for God. It needs to go deeper. We need to say, okay, can I have true fellowship? And can we use our friendship also to accomplish God's purpose? When we come to Christ, our focus, our purpose is supposed to change. That doesn't mean that we never do things we enjoy anymore. We can still have hobbies. We can still do things we enjoy. But our greatest joy should come from doing those things that we do with God and according to His purpose. Instead of always thinking about what we like and what we want to do, our thoughts should begin to reflect His thoughts. Our actions should begin to reflect His actions. Our attitudes should begin to reflect His attitude. And that's what John talked about last week. We talked about we have fellowship with God. We're learning more about God. We're becoming more united with Him. And because we're having fellowship with God, then we begin to have true fellowship with other people because together we're united under His purpose. When we accept Christ, He doesn't join our agenda. We join Him in His agenda. It should become, God, what do you want and how can I partner with you? But instead, too often, we're telling God what we want to do and saying, God, come bless this. True fellowship is when people can put aside their differences and focus on their commonality. Fellowship is when our only focus is to help each other become more like Christ, and we work together to accomplish His purposes. John said if we truly have fellowship with God, then we will have fellowship. He said you can't separate the others. If you have fellowship with God, then you will have fellowship with other people. The Christian life isn't intended to be lived alone. When you accept Christ, we also make a decision to accept one another. Everybody look around. Look at the people in this room. If you're part of God's family, you're part of the family with everyone in this room. We don't pick and choose our family. We say, I'm joining the family and I will learn to get along with these people because we are a family. We are a body. We acknowledge that we need others and that others need us. So since we're connected, we're given lots of instructions in the Bible on how to relate with one another. I want to go on record as saying that the instructions that we read about how to relate aren't simply suggestions. They're commandments. The Bible is clear that it is impossible to have the right relationship with God if we don't have the right relationships with others. So today we're going to look at the commandment to love one another. Yeah, you heard me right. Love isn't an option. Love is a command. Sometimes you say, well, I love that person and I love that person. I don't love that person and I'm not going to love that person. Jesus didn't say love some of the people. He said love everyone or love one another. He's talking about this. And actually, we should love everybody because he also says love our enemies. We don't have to love the things that some people do, but we have to love everyone. Jesus in John chapter 13, verse 34 said, a new commandment I give you. Notice that word command. Didn't say a new suggestion or a new idea. A new command I give you. Love one another. Just as I have loved you, so you must love one another. 2 chapters later, Jesus returned the same command. How many think that if something's repeated twice, it's probably pretty important? In chapter 15, he said, this is my command. Love each other. Not only did Jesus command his followers to love one another, he also demonstrated it. This command that he gave his disciples to love one another came right after he had shown them what love is by washing their feet. That's why he says, as I have loved you, I just showed you what it means to love. Loving means you're willing to get your hands dirty. Loving means you're willing to do something disgusting for somebody. Loving means you think of them before you think of yourself. And I want to remind you, Jesus didn't just wash the feet of 11 of his disciples. He washed the feet of all 12 of them. He knew that later that same night, Judas was going to betray him. Now, I don't know if I could have done that. I think I would have got to Judas and said, Judas, you and I both know what's about to take place. Let's stop playing games. Let's stop pretending that we love each other because you obviously don't love me, and I'm mad at you right now for what you're going to do. So just go get on with it. I'm not washing your feet. Go ahead and continue getting your feet dirty. But Jesus said, as I have loved you, what I just did, do for other people. Now, we've never done, at least since I've been here, we've never done a foot washing ceremony here in this church. How many think we ought to do one of those? Few hands? It doesn't mean the same thing now that it meant back then. There are other ways that we serve people now. Washing feet doesn't have the same connotation. I'm not saying there's something wrong with that, but the same thing applies. We need to be willing to do whatever someone needs. People needed to have their feet washed back then. I mean, most people here can wash their own feet and do wash their own feet, but we need to be willing to do whatever it takes in order to love other people. What makes the commandment so powerful is that Jesus didn't ask us to do something that he didn't do himself. He demonstrated his love and then said, do what I have done. If I, the God of the universe, can do this, if I can humble myself and become a servant in order to love, then who are you to say you can't do that? I know I'm not there yet, but my goal is to be like Jesus. So I'm committed to learning to love the way that Jesus loved. The command to love one another is so important that it is repeated 17 times in the New Testament. It's echoed by 3 different authors in 7 New Testament books. All of the other one another statements that we're going to talk about actually come back to this one, because if we can learn this one, the others will automatically happen. If we don't learn this one, it's going to be a struggle to reach the others. So maybe if we just concentrate on this one, it'll happen. Listen to the role that love plays in some of the other one another statements. Romans 12:10. Be devoted to one another. That's what we're going to talk about. What does it mean to be devoted? Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Galatians 5:13. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but don't use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. Ephesians 4:2. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Hebrews 10:24. Let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Serve one another in love. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. And let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds. Love one another. It's not just a suggestion. It's a command. Now, I already told you how many times that love one another is talked about in the Bible, how many times love is talked about in the New Testament. The Apostle John is probably the New Testament writer that talks about this command more than any other. So let's look at what John says about loving one another. 1 John chapter 2, verses 3-4. He says, we know that we have come to know him if we keep his commands. Okay, remember, Jesus commanded, a new command I give you is love one another. So we know that we have come to know him if we keep his commands. Whoever says, I know him, but does not do what he commands is a liar. And the truth is not in that person. Okay, now, I didn't talk about love, but he's getting to that. Okay, we jump down a few verses because he just said we have to obey the commands. Now in verse 9, he says, anyone who claims to be in the light but hates a brother or sister is still in the darkness. We can say we're a Christian all we want. We can say we love God all we want. But if we don't love the rest of the family, every person in the family, he says we're a liar. Chapter 4, verses 7 and 8. This is one you should all know. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. But whoever does not love doesn't know God, because God is love. And then jump down to 16. The second part of the verse says, God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in them. Same chapter, starting at verse 20. Whoever claims to love God, yet hates a brother or sister, is a liar. Whoever does not love their brother or sister who they have seen cannot love God, whom they have not seen. And he has given us this command. Anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister. Now, even though we all know that Jesus said, and we know that we're supposed to love each other, how many of you have come to realize this kind of love doesn't happen naturally? We all know it. We know what it says. But there are some people that are just a little bit more difficult to love, aren't there? But we're still commanded to love them. It doesn't say only love the easy ones. It says love everybody. And let me give you a little hint. That person that you're having trouble loving, they're probably thinking the same thing about you. They're probably thinking, I wish that person was just a little bit easier to love. It usually goes both ways. Nobody said that following Christ was going to be easy. When we read Paul's letter to the church in Colossae, it sounds like the Colossians were struggling to put off their old habits. They had come to Christ, but most of the book deals with things that they're still doing the way they did them before. And the whole book is saying, you can't live like that anymore. You say you're following Christ, so you got to get rid of that stuff, and you got to start being like Christ. In the 3rd chapter, he instructs his listeners to put their old life to death. Verse 3, he says, put to death things that belong to your earthly nature. How many of you know that hating other people or not being able to tolerate other people, being irritable with other people, how many of you know that is part of the old life? That is not supposed to be carried with you into the new life. It does, but we're supposed to put it off. He says, put to death, crucify those things. It's an effort. Get rid of those things. Verses 7 and 8, he says, you used to do those things, but now you must rid yourself of them. In verse 9, he says, take off the old self. And in verse 10, he says, put on the new self. And then part of the new self in verse 14, he says, put on love. We need to make a conscious effort. We need to say, you know what? What I'm doing right now is not walking in love. The thoughts I have towards that person right now, and they may have treated me terrible, but those thoughts that I'm having, this is not what I want. This is not what Christ wants for me. I am going to take off that hatred, and I am going to put on love. I am going to learn how to love. It takes work to take something off. and put something else on. When our clothes are dirty, they don't just change themselves. How many of you notice that? We have to first notice that they're dirty and that they need to be changed. But just noting that our clothes are dirty doesn't do anything. We say, oh, my clothes are dirty, they're smelly, but I don't care. I'm just tired. I'm just going to sit on this nice couch with my dirty clothes. When I come in from working out in the yard and I'm dirty and sweaty and I come in and I want to relax, sometimes he says, don't you dare sit in that chair until you go change your clothes. You're not sitting in that chair in those clothes. There are a lot of so-called Christians walking around in our churches that need to change their spiritual clothes. Most of them know they're not walking in love. They know they're irritable and judgmental and selfish, but they keep making excuses and saying something like, well, that's just the way I am, so you're going to have to get used to it. You're going to have to deal with it. That's not what Paul says. He says, when you realize you got stinky clothes, take them off and put on the clothes of Christ. Put on love. The Bible makes it clear that we can't have that kind of attitude if we really want to be followers of Christ. We need to make a conscious effort and put in the work that is required to learn how to love the way that Christ commands us to love. Real love doesn't mean we just keep our mouths shut or avoid those that rub us the wrong way. Remember, Jesus didn't avoid Judas. He loved Judas and showed love for Judas, even when Judas was in the middle of planning or plotting. In fact, he had already started the plot of betraying him. Unfortunately, a lot of times we don't want to pursue true love. So we substitute it for what I call social niceness. Social niceness and love are not the same thing. Social niceness says, I can put up with him and her and be civil for an hour. Or I can just stay away from them so we don't have conflict. But love says, I value you and I will learn how to love you. This problem is not you. Yeah, you might do some things that rub me the wrong way, but the real problem is not you. The real problem is me, and I have not yet learned how to fully love God, because if I fully love God, I would love you in spite of your problems. So I'm going to work on me, and I'm going to learn how to love you. We have to choose to love. On the surface, we might find nothing about that person that we like, but we need to be willing to dig deeper and find some common ground. And for us, our common ground should be we love God and we want God's will. We want to accomplish His purposes. And so we will come together and we will partner together. Even if we can't find anything else we agree on, we will partner together to fulfill the mission of God. Love says, I might not like some of the things you do, but I choose to love you in spite of them. Love doesn't necessarily agree that someone's actions are appropriate, but it cares enough to get close enough anyway in order to help that person become better. Because maybe their attitude does need to change. How is their attitude going to change if they're never around people who have the proper attitude? So I'm going to work on my attitude and hope that my attitude helps you become better. Social niceness causes me to say the appropriate things to a hurting person. But love doesn't just talk. Love gets involved and does something to ease the pain. Social niceness says, I'll pray for you, but doesn't follow through. Isn't it easy to say, I'll pray for you? But how often do we say, I'll pray for you? That's the nice thing to say. That's what they want to hear. But how often do we say, I'll pray for you, but we don't actually pray for them? Love says, I'll pray for you, and does it, but it doesn't leave it there. Love says, I will pray for you, but at the same time, I'm going to ask God, is there something that I can do beyond prayer? Can I actually help you with this? Because God often, in fact, let me say, God usually works through people. There are miracles, and that's just something that no person can do, and God just has to do it. But the way God normally operates here on earth is through other people. We are his hands. We are his feet. And it's too easy to see somebody with a need and just say, I'll pray for you. Aren't I a good person? I just prayed for them. It's just saying, God, what can I do? That's what love does. What can I do to help with this situation? Some of the people that I talked to this week, and I called them back, first off, they were surprised that I even called them back. They went and they said they had a need, and most of them didn't say exactly what the need was. They just left their name and number, said they had a need. So I called them up and said, hey, I'm Pastor Jerry from Central Assembly. You came and got food. You stopped by and said you had other needs, so I'm just calling to find out if it's something we can do. And I said, we may not be able to, depending on what it is, but I might be able to refer you to somebody. What is it you're needing? And first off, they go, man, I can't believe you actually called us back. Because too many people say, I'm going to, but it's the nice thing. They were surprised that I even called back. And then they say, well, I really need toilet paper and shampoo and all that kind of stuff. And by the next day, I'm calling them up, hey, I got stuff for you. You want me to bring it by to you? Do you want to come look at it? They came in. I can't believe you actually did that. So many people have said they would do it and they haven't followed through. Love says, I will do what I can do to help. So let's go back to Jesus' command to love one another. Right after giving the command to love, he said this in John 13:35. By this, what's the this refer to? By loving. He just said, love people the way I do. If you do, by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Notice Jesus didn't say people will know we're his disciples because we go to church every Sunday. Someone said, I just can't believe my neighbors don't know I'm a Christian. Don't they see me leave every Sunday morning at the same time with my big Bible in my hand? They should know I'm a Christian because I go to church every Sunday. Jesus didn't say they're going to know you're a Christian. How many have figured out there's a lot of people that go to church every Sunday who probably should take the name Christian off their title? Jesus didn't say they're going to know we're Christians because we memorize 1,000 scriptures and we can quote the Word of God. In fact, there's a verse that says the devil can quote the Word of God. He knows what the Word of God says, but he's not a Christian. He didn't say they're going to know that you're a Christian or they're not going to know you're my disciples because you have a full grasp of theology. You can explain the deep things. You understand the Greek and the Hebrew, and they know you're a disciple because of how intelligent you are in scripture things. He didn't say they're going to know you're a Christian because you look or dress a certain way. Not even because you wear the t-shirt that says it. He said his true disciples will be defined by one thing, and one thing only: their love for one another. One of the great Christian theologians of the last century, Francis Schaeffer, said, our relationship with each other is the criteria that the world uses to judge whether our message is truthful. Let me say that again. I think I'll put it on the screen too. Our relationship with each other is the criteria that the world uses to judge whether our message is truthful. If we say we love God, but we're always talking about other believers or talking about churches, and sometimes they are in error, but when we go around venting about those things on Facebook or complaining about those things, or we're not demonstrating love, the world sees right through that. And they say, they're a bunch of talk. How many think they want to be a part of something where we can't even get along with each other? Schaeffer believed, and the Bible teaches, that love is the ultimate confirmation of Christianity. Love is the proof of our faith. Love is the evidence of what we believe. John didn't pull any punches. He flat out said, if you claim to love God but you don't love others, then you're a liar. I'm glad he said it, because that way I don't have to be the one to do it. You don't like it, take it up with John. Most of us here today would agree with the command to love in principle. We sing about it, we read about it, we talk about it, but do we actually do it? We agree with love in the abstract. but we struggle with it in the concrete. Is my mic messing up? I hear it popping up here. Is it working? Okay, I'm hearing a pop here. We agree with love in the abstract, but we struggle with it in the concrete. A father had just put in a new driveway. The concrete was still fresh and wet. So he fenced it off with sticks and tape, and he instructed his young son to stay off the driveway until it dried. Do you understand? He asked. Yeah, Dad, replied his son. A few minutes later, the boy went running around the house, and guess what happened? He ran through the wet concrete, leaving his feet in there. Dad was furious, started yelling at his son and threatening him with all kinds of punishment. Mom heard the yelling and reminded her husband how much he loved his son. Says, remember, this is your son. Remember, you love him. And Dad, after settling down a bit, said, well, I might love him in the abstract, but I don't love him in the concrete. If we're honest with ourselves, we have to admit that we're all a little bit like that dad. It's easy to love in the abstract when everything's going the way we want it to, when everybody's treating us right and everybody's saying good things about us and they're doing what we think they should do. It's easy. But when someone else doesn't do what we ask or what we expect them to do, it's hard to show love in the concrete. And often when we look back at the situation later, we find that the issue we had with that person really wasn't as big of a deal as what we made it out to be at the time. I mean, even think about that little boy running through the concrete. What if they just went out and wrote his name and age on there and left that as something to remember years down the road? This is how small our son's feet used to be or something. I mean, is it really that big of a deal? We got footprints in our concrete? A woman came home early from choir practice. Her husband was amazed because the choir never got done that early. Why are you home so soon? He asked. She answered, well, we had to call choir practice off early because the organist and choir director got into a terrible argument about how to sing Love Divine. It's easy to say, but do we do it? Until our love for each other rises above our own feelings, our petty differences, our personal preferences, our superficial likes and dislikes, we're never going to see the full power of God working in the church, and will never make an impact on the world. The world is looking for real love. And where will they find real love if they can't find it? In the church. In 1984, Tina Turner recorded her first and only Billboard #1 hit. Does anybody know what it was? What's love got to do with it? Let me answer that question for you. The answer is everything. Jesus said the two greatest commandments are love. Love God, love people. The Apostle Paul said, nothing else matters if we don't have love. We can have everything else, but if we don't have love, it's worthless. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 1-3. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I might boast, but I do not have love, I gain nothing. Are there people that are hard to love? Of course. Will loving people the way that God tells us to love them be hard? Absolutely. If I love others, will they always return the love? Not necessarily. So can I commit only to loving those who make the same commitment to me? No. Can I love God without showing love to others? Well, what does the Bible say? No. If we love God, we must learn to love other people in spite of their flaws, in spite of their sins. And as Christian brothers and sisters, we're going to talk about it as we go along. Part of our job is to help them learn right from wrong, to help them grow. But there is a right and wrong way to go about that. We speak the truth, but we got to make sure when we speak the truth, we're speaking the truth in love. And we got to build the relationship first so they're willing to receive that. And that even happens to Christian brothers and sisters. You know, it's easy for us to go up to somebody in the church who's doing something that we don't think is right and just blast them for that and even start quoting scripture. You've never gone out of your way to greet them and here we're talking about friends, become their friend, but you're going to tell them how to live? We build the relationships, and out of those relationships comes respect, and then they're willing to hear what you say. And one of my favorite sayings, and I used to say it all the time, I haven't said it for a while, they have to know you care before they care what you know. So if we could focus more on the showing love, and we've got that thing down, then we can start moving on to the other things. The instructing one another and the challenging one another and those other things, but we've got to get the love thing down first. So what does love look like? We read on in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, starting with verse 4. Love is patient. Think about that one for a minute. Does that describe you? Especially in relationships with other people? Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. Even when something should anger us, it doesn't say we never get angry, but we're slow to anger. It keeps no record of wrongs. Well, I've let that go 5 times. If they do it again, then I'm going to blow up. If it keeps no records, every time's like the first time, right? Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Love never fails. Never. True love. True love. The God kind of love never fails. Now, some of you are a little bit further along on this love journey than others. I want to admit to you guys, sometimes my love fails. I haven't arrived yet. Because if it was really the kind of love that God wants me to have, if it was really the kind of love that Jesus showed, I would love at all times. I know I've got room for improvement. And I think a few of you, some of you guys have mastered it. But I know some of you here have room to grow. It's not an option. It's a command. If we love God, we must learn to love one another.